As you're studying environmental science and ecology, it's important to understand that we as humans are a part of our environment as well. We have the potential to be stewards of our surroundings and take action to protect ecosystems. However, as a human race, we also have a tendency to have negative impacts on our environment. And that is going to be the focus of this final video lecture of the unit. One way in which humans negatively impact the environment is by contributing to global climate change. Our actions, such as burning fossil fuels, releases greenhouse gases, which are types of gases that help trap heat in the atmosphere. Water vapor is the most common greenhouse gas up in the atmosphere, but carbon dioxide is one that is frequently emitted by humans as we burn fossil fuels. Methane is also a greenhouse gas commonly emitted by us. You can find methane in agriculture. We have a lot of cows for meat and dairy production. Due to the way in which their stomachs are designed and how they digest food, they release a lot of methane. So in areas where we have a lot of agriculture, you get methane being released into the atmosphere. Landfills can also release methane. In any process where you have decomposition without a lot of oxygen present. Methane is about 23 times as potent of a greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide is. So even though you tend to associate global climate change with carbon dioxide emissions, methane is also a very important contributor. And there are other greenhouse gases we emit as well, such as nitrous oxide and chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. These gases contribute to the greenhouse effect, in which, as the Earth radiates heat into the space, it's trapped in the atmosphere, much like a greenhouse where you would grow plants traps heat to keep the plants warm. So this greenhouse effect has the effect of keeping the planet warm. This is a natural phenomenon and has been a good thing throughout Earth's history. As heat is being trapped, it prevents major fluctuations in Earth's temperature and can keep the temperature at a suitable one for living things. What's happening now, though, is that as our actions continue to emit greenhouse gases, more and more heat is being trapped up in the atmosphere. And so now we're reaching a point where global temperatures are increasing too much, and that can lead to some disastrous consequences. So in general, as we emit more greenhouse gases, the planet is warming overall. And so for a while, that used to be called global warming. However, that is a misnomer because though the overall temperature is increasing, there are actually parts of the world that will experience colder temperatures as a result. And so therefore, we have changed the name to climate change to better represent what is happening. But due to this greenhouse effect and other contributors, there are major changes in both global temperature and weather patterns. For example, in recent years, we're seeing an increase in very severe storms that used to happen only every once in a while. Other consequences of climate change include sea level rise and increases in ocean temperature. So you may have heard that the Everglades in perhaps your lifetime could be underwater, and that's in part due to sea level rise. So down in Miami, for example, they're having to completely redo their infrastructure and change their roads to accommodate for potential flooding in the very near future. One of the reasons why sea level is rising is because as temperatures are rising, more ice caps and glaciers are melting, and so that's adding extra water to the oceans. Climate change can also cause changes in biome distribution, where areas like tropical rainforests can exist, where can deserts be found. We're seeing an increase in areas that are classified as deserts, but a decrease in available rainforest area, and that's partly due to climate change. One potentially good consequence of climate change is that you could actually end up with the ability to grow more crops. And that's because one of the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, is a needed reactant for photosynthesis. So if you can increase the amount of photosynthesis, you could grow more crops. It's not quite that simple, though, because you have to consider that as temperature is increasing, you might have more evaporation, and so you're losing water, the other needed reactant. But that potential still exists and is promising in terms of how to counteract our emissions. Another consequence of human impact is ozone depletion. Ozone is a gas, it's O3 gas, so three atoms of oxygen together to form a molecule of ozone. And this gas is found in the stratosphere and it protects living things from harmful UV radiation. It's sort of like Earth's sunscreen, if you will. As we emit chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, or other volatile organic compounds, which are harmful gases that can be aerosolized and end up in the atmosphere, those compounds destroy the ozone layer. And as that ozone layer is being destroyed, more UV rays are able to reach Earth. If you're not very familiar with CFCs or volatile organic compounds, know that they can be found in things like refrigerants, aerosols, and vehicle emissions, and various processes in industry. If you've used hairspray or know anybody in your family that does, you might notice that on the packaging it now says CFC free or no CFCs. And that's because hairspray used to be full of CFCs to help make the spray aerosolized. And now that we know that those are not good compounds, companies have been pressured into making hairsprays without them. The diagram on the bottom right shows you what has happened to the ozone layer in just about 13 years. And so if you consider where we are now in about 20 some years later than what this map is showing, you might predict that the ozone situation is even worse. But what you can see here in this diagram is that in 1984, you had more areas in green and yellow, which are about average levels of ozone. Whereas in the 1997 version of the Earth, you can see more blues and purples, indicating that those areas have lower amounts of ozone. So it's like applying less sunscreen to the Earth. More UV radiation is able to get to our planet now. What are some of the effects of ozone depletion? Well, obviously, if you don't have ozone, you're going to have more sunlight and harmful rays that are able to enter the planet. That radiation can cause damage to DNA. And you should remember from our previous units on cell reproduction that if DNA is damaged, that can bring about mutations. And if those mutations happen to be in genes controlling the cell cycle, you could end up with cancers, especially skin cancer. UV radiation can also cause eye damage, problems with your immune system and respiratory systems. It can cause your skin to age prematurely, and it can even interfere with growth and development of other organisms such as amphibians. Human population growth is another major impact that we are having on our environment. As technology, medicine, and society have become more advanced, it allows people to live longer and also have more children that survive. So the effect is our human population continues to grow. So with more people, that means more land and more resources are needing to be used. So it puts pressure on our surroundings and our ecosystems. As we generate waste, that means that more pollution is occurring as our population is increasing. There's also more poverty. Yes, we're having more people, but that sort of has the effect of lowering quality of life for some areas because resources are limited, even though our population continues to grow. And lastly, we're losing biodiversity. As we're using resources and as we're exerting pressure on neighboring ecosystems, that can cause some life forms to either have to adapt or, unfortunately, be driven to extinction. If you're interested in learning about our human population, I encourage you to take a look at the link on the bottom of the slide. It's a link to the Census Bureau's population clock, and you can watch in real time what both the US population is and the world population. It's a little scary, but pretty interesting to look at. Humans also tend to destroy forest ecosystems through deforestation. Deforestation is defined as cutting down forests for various purposes like construction or urbanization, agriculture, using wood as a resource, such as for fuel or building materials, and even for mining and oil drilling in that nearby area. You would have to clear the trees out in order to drill into the ground. The consequences of deforestation are pretty severe. One consequence is that you increase the amount of soil erosion. Trees are really good at anchoring soil to the ground, so they're helpful in preventing erosion. If you cut down those trees, you've lost the big vegetation that's able to anchor soil into its place. So areas are more vulnerable to things like mudslides and landslides as soil is taken easily by wind and water away from an area. Obviously, as you cut down trees, you are removing organisms, so biodiversity should go down. And because so many organisms rely on trees or live in trees, they're in threat too as you cut down forests. You can increase the probability of flooding and drought through deforestation. In addition to anchoring soil, trees can also soak up excess water. And so if you've cut down the trees, now there's more water that has no place to be soaked in. So it instead runs on top of the land and you can get flooding. And then finally, we are contributing to climate change. You know from a previous unit that when you do deforestation, you don't just chop down the trees. Usually what happens is slash and burn, where you cut down the trees and then light them on fire. And that contributes to climate change in two ways. One, burning those trees releases carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas. And then at the same time, you've gotten rid of the very organisms that could take that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis. Humans contribute negatively to the environment by helping form acid rain. Acid rain is rainwater with a pH lower than normal. By nature, rainwater tends to be a little bit acidic, but acid rain is, if you want to get really technical, defined as having a pH of 5.6 or lower. What causes acid rain? Releasing compounds like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide compounds can combine up in the atmosphere with water vapor and oxygen, and through chemical reactions, that forms acidic compounds. When that water vapor then condenses and falls to the earth as precipitation, you have that more acidic water that is reaching the planet. So there are two major sources of what we call these acid rain precursors, like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides. Those are volcanoes, which are a natural contributor to acid rain, and then burning fossil fuels, which is a human cause. This diagram here goes through the process of how acid rain is formed. I would encourage you to pause this video and study it so you know it pretty well, but to quickly go over it, areas like factories or cars emit these acid precursors like sulfur compounds, nitrous oxides, and they combine with water up in the atmosphere to form acids. Those acids then fall to the ground where they can cause destruction to ecosystems. There are several effects of acid rain, one of which is to acidify oceans, streams, lakes, and other bodies of water. In other words, as the rain falls to the planet, it is lowering the pH of bodies of water. If you remember from way back when we learned about enzymes, you know that enzymes function at specific pHs. So if acid rain is lowering pH of bodies of water, that might mean that an area is now unsuitable for living things. It's not at a pH in which their enzymes can work. Acid rain can also damage trees, especially at the higher elevations where you're closer to the atmosphere, and that's shown on the bottom right of your screen. Damages this tree so they can't do photosynthesis, so that can even contribute, again, to climate change. They damage soil. Soil pH is very important because plants rely on a certain soil pH in order to grow, and that can be affected. And then finally, acid rain can break down building materials. Famously, marble is something that will weather and erode when you have acid rain. You can see these statues here in which their faces have been kind of broken down, and that's all due to acid rain. Biodiversity is defined as the variety of life in an area. Human actions such as building cities and having farmland can destroy native habitats and force organisms out of their native areas. This has an impact of decreasing the biodiversity of an area or decreasing how many different life forms can be found. An effect of lowering biodiversity is that, unfortunately, if organisms can't adapt fast enough or find a new area to live in, they might be driven to extinction. Another effect is that areas that depend on ecotourism, such as tropical areas where people can go and visit a rainforest, if their biodiversity decreases, people won't want to go there anymore. And so they can lose a major source of revenue if they can't offer ecotourism. As you lose biodiversity, you also lose a variety of natural resources, some of which can be used as medicines that can solve or cure very severe diseases. And finally, as you lose biodiversity, you lose what are called ecosystem services, which is basically a way in which the environment can help us out. To give you an example, wetlands are really good at filtering water and also preventing flooding. If you lose the biodiversity of those wetlands, you don't have as many plants that can absorb and filter water, so you might be more susceptible to water pollution and flooding. So it's like the biodiversity is able to help protect our water and prevent us from flooding. And you would lose that service if you lose the amount of biodiversity. Okay, the final impact on the environment that we'll discuss in this video lecture is that of invasive species. An invasive species is defined as a non-native species to an area that kind of takes over whatever environment it has been introduced to. Invasive species are dangerous because they don't have natural predators, so there's nothing to keep their population in check. They also tend to outcompete native organisms for resources, forcing them to either leave the area or worse, driving them to extinction. So how do invasive species relate to humans? Well, oftentimes we are the ones that are introducing these non-native species to new areas. Sometimes those introductions are accidental. For example, the brown tree snake pictured at the bottom of your slide was accidentally brought over to Guam. It's native to Asia, and it was able to fit into the wheel wells of airplanes. So as a plane flew from its native habitat to Guam, the snakes were able to escape there, and now they're living all over Guam. They are a disaster to native organisms such as birds. The amount of bird diversity has gone down due to these snakes eating them and having no predators to keep them in check. Other times, the introductions of invasive species were done on purpose. You might recognize the bird on this slide. This is a European starling, and we can find them around here. They're native to Europe, as their name would suggest. They got here due to a group of Shakespeare enthusiasts that thought it would be a good idea to have all the birds mentioned in Shakespeare's plays be living in the United States. So they decided to bring over a group of starlings and just let them go in the United States because they thought that would be good. And actually, their first attempts did not work. That was not a clue to them to just leave it alone. They kept trying until this bird got established, and now they're in herds of the hundreds, and they are annoying, they're noisy, they spread diseases, and they outcompete native organisms for food. So that one was done on purpose. And there are many other examples of invasive species, both accidental introductions and intentional ones. They all sort of have the same effect, though, is that they take over and disrupt their new ecosystems. I've sort of hinted at this before, but one impact of invasive species is that you can spread diseases. And oftentimes, those diseases are ones that the native organisms have not seen before. You might know in history, for example, the spreading of smallpox to the United States killed a lot of Native Americans because they were not accustomed to that disease. So likewise, these invasive organisms can bring new diseases that wipe out native populations. The starling that you saw on the last slide is one example of that. They can also drive native species to extinction by outcompeting them or by eating them directly. As you have an invasive species take over an area, you lose biodiversity. For example, pictured on this slide is kudzu, which is taking over southern states right now. It's not native there, though, and it just grows and grows and grows. There's really nothing that eats kudzu like this. It grows incredibly fast and can very quickly take over houses. It can grow over cars. And you don't really see much else in this picture other than kudzu. So you can see firsthand just how biodiversity is decreased. And along with that, you are changing the food webs and ecosystem functionings. You're adding another species in the mix that is disrupting the whole balance of the ecosystem. And that brings us to the end of this human impacts lecture. I hope that this video lecture inspires you to take a role in trying to better your environment, whether that's using less electricity or fighting for less fossil fuel usage. It's important that we become stewards of our own planet. And you are the ones that are inheriting this problem. And I hope that it's you guys that are solving it too. Should you have any questions on human impact, please feel free to contact your teacher. Thank you for watching.